Hi, beautiful ones. Nura here. Thanks for joining me on December's astrology talk, centered and cyclical. So my intention in recording these videos is to just share what's coming through. It's pretty casual. I'm trying my absolute best to not make it overly astrological, jargony, even though if you're here and you're a student or a practitioner, that's probably exactly what you want. Can't please everyone. If you are an astrologer or an aspiring astrologer, I do want to remind you right away that I have a sale going on for my Foundations of Astrology course, which is geared towards the beginner, but I think also includes some intermediate elements as well, going over all of the things that you would need to be able to read your chart for yourself. So that sale is going on until December 12th, my birthday. I don't know. If you've seen the memes of like things Sagittarians will do, but they will remind you that it's your birthday. And I mean, why wouldn't you? It's time to celebrate ourselves. So happy birthday to all of you beautiful Sagittarians out there. And then later on in the month of December, the Capricorns in the Northern Hemisphere, we are heading towards the solstice, the inner light, rooting into our center, really refilling from this inner well of wisdom. And as we really connect with the solar energy of both Sagittarius and then into Capricorn, we really are exploring what else is possible, tapping into our wisdom, tapping into our experience to see how do we make the most of this precious life. There's this quote that I have on my wall. It's by Confucius. It says, "We have two lives. The second begins when we realize we only have one." And I need to read that on the daily, which is why I have it on my fancy little letterboard up on my wall. That's like, as soon as I walk into the room, it's the first thing I see. I hope this like door back here is not too obvious or glaring for you. But that reminder that we have two lives and the second begins the moment that we realize we have one. What does that invite you into? What new possibility? What new way of thinking? So these themes of possibilities and stretching our way of thinking are really on the menu for this month ahead as we dive deeper into the heart of Sagittarius season. And we've got Mercury retrograde happening in Sagittarius. We are also already in Jupiter, Neptune, Chiron, Uranus retrograde season. So a lot of this outer and bridge planet. And then now we're going to have these two personal planets, Mercury and then Mars, about a week into Sag season, stationing retrograde. This should really help to situate all of these bigger collective revolutions, dare we say, revelations, reflections. It will help bring them closer to home, bring them closer to our personal capacity to really integrate and work with them and refine the way we're thinking and the way that we are taking action. I love to feel into Sagittarius season as a time for visioning and perhaps revisioning with that Mercury stationing retrograde in Sagittarius. And that reminder that the one with the biggest vision wins. So let it be your heart-centered creative vision that really roots you and guides you. And that especially as we are entering an era of so much unknown, worldviews toppling old worldviews, paradigms shattering old paradigms, that we have an opportunity to get out of our own self-limiting boxes, the ways that we've been talking to ourselves, the ways that we've been listening to even others, the ways that we've been actually contributing perhaps to the echo chamber of the trends and the algorithm and the collective conversation. It's not that I have anything against the collective conversation, but I will say it creates a sense of inner stagnancy to just hear the same thing being spoken about all the time. Maybe that's just me. And I feel like that's going to be one of the biggest challenges, especially creatively, with the ingress of Pluto into Aquarius there to stay for the next 20 years. I'm sure that you've already become aware of the issues with like AI images and art and music and movies and the absolute conflict of interests when it pertains to, human artists and their work and their contribution compared to the work, the creation of the machine, and what's the interface there. And How does that contribute in some way to the conversation of, worldviews and the ways that we're all changing as a collective? So there are paradigm shifting within all of this. And this might sound like I'm suggesting to like hop on the bandwagon, but it's almost the opposite, because it is easier. This is our capacity to hold contradiction and paradox, right? It is easy to make personal changes when you see the whole world making changes around you. So in that sense, it's like, yes, there's like a bandwagon of change, but it's almost like the polar opposite in some senses to like not hop on the bandwagon of being a copycat or like mimicking what everybody else is doing because you haven't yet sourced from within that divine spark of creativity that is yours alone. And that, my friends, is the nexus point of interest to me. I'm forever living in the fascinating question of how service and self-actualization are this interwoven braiding of purpose. Because of course we came here to create something individually. We were all gifted that breath of life, that spark of life from the divine, from source. And only we can really be the one who actualizes that into the world. And I think we have a divine responsibility to do that. But a lot of times, and especially lately, while we've had all of this shifting of Pluto into Aquarius, there's been a lot of conversations around how we need to really make a collective change, but how that change is supposed to look and how it's supposed to happen, that almost seems in a lot of ways to stifle the individual voice, to stifle the individual sense of creativity. So I say all of this with a lot of awareness that it's nuanced and it's going to depend on the situation that we're talking about. I'm kind of talking in these like vague, ambiguous terms, which a Sagittarian does, but it's really with that intention of trying to see like, what is the bigger picture here? What is the bigger opportunity? What is the bigger possibility? So just a reminder that you have choices all the time, that your whole life is a series of choices, and that it's almost, gosh, I feel like everything that I want to say sounds so dire, but it's a little bit of like a warning to not get swept up in the echo chamber of and just repeating what everybody else is saying. Because we can say things so many times that we start to believe them, but they could be false, right? Like just because we say them a bunch of times doesn't make it true. And I do believe, maybe this is my Sagittarian bias, but I do believe that there is an ultimate truth for each of us in terms of our purpose. It doesn't mean that there's one expression of it, or there's only one way it's supposed to look, and every individual can only know that for themselves. But things can be true and things can be false. Like when we start to deviate into this idea of like everything is true for every individual, like we're playing into fascinating delusions, And I think it was Nietzsche who said something along the lines of, in order to create the life you want, you actually have to be into the delusion. You actually have to. So he's saying you have to engage in the delusion. And there's another part of me, in the name of Jupiter in Gemini, opposing this approaching Mercury, or this current Mercury retrograde, that's saying like, okay, how do you hold both of those things? That we don't want to play too far into delusion, but we also need delusion. What does that mean? That's a mind trip. We also don't want to play too far into the side of like selfish, only focusing on my personal self-actualization to the detriment of like service and collective evolution over here. But like, what's the middle place, or what's the integrated, synthesized perspective that makes all of those things possible, where it's not about choosing one or the other way of thinking, but it's really about actually expanding beyond that argument, expanding beyond the dichotomies and seeing that there's something else. So that's really the potential of Sagittarius. So if you're finding yourself in some kind of inner dilemma, like a inner argument, or maybe it's an external argument with life. This month ahead is offering an olive branch saying, you don't have to choose between one or the other worldview. You actually are being invited to expand your worldview and your consciousness to be bigger than both of those dichotomies, to almost come more into a state of oneness. And that's that Saturn in Pisces kind of quietly, and Neptune in Pisces quietly holding down that water reminder, that Piscean reminder of oneness, of the fact that, you know, in the grand scheme of our lives, everything is good. You know, everything's playing out the way it's meant to be. In the end, everything will be known. You know, there's this kind of forgiveness, surrender, acceptance energy that both Sagittarius and Pisces relate with, because they're both signs that are hosted by Jupiter. And the fact that Jupiter is in Gemini kind of exacerbating and amplifying the duality, amplifying the division between worldviews. It gives us this opportunity to say, okay, wait a minute, like there's actually a much bigger and potentially more useful, that's Saturn, he wants it to be useful. There's potentially a more useful way to think about things that will actually encourage a sturdy foundation. But it requires this gorgeous and conflicting dance of worldviews. It feels like a juggle, like a ping pong tennis match, kind of like going back and forth. And that stretches us. So that's a big part of the nature of what is happening in the field right now, energetically. And that's being amplified by the Mercury retrograde and the opposition to Jupiter retrograde. It's going to be also, you know, the energy of reflection and refinement is so prominent this month with all of the retrograde, Mars included. So how do we take action on these different ways of knowing, these different perspectives, these different seeming dichotomies, seeming contradictions, and find a new point of integration? So December 1st, we have the new moon in Sagittarius. It's at 9 degrees, and then also co-present with Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius. And this new moon is also trine Mars in Leo, about to station retrograde, and the North Node in Aries, and Chiron in Aries. And that fire trine, the grand fire trine, is really bringing about the qualities of inspiration, motivation, passion, enthusiasm, drive, and it's really linking the functions of like purpose and self-image, that's sun and moon, new moon, new moon, new me, right? New possibility, with Mercury, way of thinking, and then Mars, this way of doing, and Chiron, this way of healing, and North Node, this way of taking a step forward into something new where there are no rule books and there's nobody that's done it before. And so there's nobody to copy, actually. There's no way to mimic something, to even necessarily learn the skills, which kind of contributes to doing things the safe way. You know, the tried and true way that somebody else has already done and mastered. That modality was really obvious, that sort of pathway of like hierarchical master apprentice, we're going to work our way up this ladder of success, was very prevalent in the Pluto and Capricorn time from 2008 until now. And we've just closed that chapter for the rest of our lives. Doesn't mean that Capricorn energy is no longer present, because that doesn't make sense. We still have Capricorn energy, but we have evolved it to the point of almost like having taken that strategy as far as it can go when it comes to our re-empowerment journey, when it comes to our soul journey. And that's not to say that if you have strong Capricorn in your chart, that means that's not your strategy anymore, because it very well might be. So we'll put a pin in that, you know, let's connect for a reading if that's the question that you have around how the Capricorn energy is evolving for you. But in a general collective sense, there is a whole new way, a whole new strategy coming in that is just not based on that following what has been done before. The tried and true proven path is probably not going to work anymore. There might be a little bit of that, like riding on the coattails of it kind of thing, but it won't be this like clear, okay, you do XYZ and you're guaranteed these results. It's a lot more about originality. You cannot sustain what is not you. It's a lot more about being authentic, not just parroting and mimicking and being an echo chamber of what everybody else is saying just so that we can be on trend and like the algorithm likes us. It's a lot more of actually exploding out of that. If we look back at past events with Pluto and Aquarius, we can think about the Copernican revolution. You know, there used to be a time, and I mean there technically still is, where people thought that the world was flat and that everything in the solar system revolved around us. I'm really curious if there will be comments on this video from people who are flat earthers. And I don't really love calling people like in a box by their beliefs because that's silly, but we'll see. But that's a thing that happened during Pluto and Aquarius time. You know, this scientific breakthrough that, oh, the solar system does not revolve around the Earth. Even though much of astrology is geocentric, we're aware of a heliocentric model that has given rise to new ways of understanding astrology, which even that awareness alone, how does that shift prior interpretations? What does it add to prior interpretations, astrological interpretations that were made, you know, when we believed that the world was flat or that everything revolved around us? And that's just, you know, fun fact. There's also been countless, you know, scientific and industrial revolutions and even just like cultural revolutions, wars of independence that are so associated with Pluto and Aquarius. And we're in that now. And the thing that is true amongst all of those different times as punctuated points in history is that there's always a power to the people kind of influence. And there's a way of knowing and a way of understanding reality that is totally flipped on its head. There's something that we probably haven't even fully found out yet, that when we become more aware of these ways of knowing, it will change everything that we do. So there's not really this, oh, just follow what everybody else did before and it's going to work. And that becomes a really interesting place to be. We're being asked to be more creative. And that's collectively, but that's also as individuals. And something that I find to be really important as a reminder within all of that is that when we follow our fire, here's how we circle back to the new moon in Sagittarius. When we follow our fire, when we follow our passions and our divinely seated desires, we are becoming closer to our creative purpose. We are honoring life. We are honoring the divine spark of creativity that lives in us. And that honoring, even if sometimes it seems like it's selfish or self-focused, self-centered, there's a lot of ways that we've sort of collectively poo-pooed on this like artistic creative expression. And now AI is coming in and like stealing it all. It's really weird. That creative expression is also what makes life worth living. It gives meaning. It gives motivation. And those words, motivation, meaning, joy, those are all words that we associate with Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, the fire signs. So it really is an important time to be focusing on that fire. And despite what everybody, the echo chamber of voices outside are suggesting, that there's one voice, one flame that's more important to listen to than all the rest. Doesn't mean don't take advice. I mean, you're listening here. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for honoring me with your time. And thank you for trusting me to interpret the stars. But more than anything, your own voice and your own creative inner flame is the most important one. And there might be some worldviews, there might be some perspectives that come into collision as you learn that. So the new moon in Sagittarius is really bringing that energy to the whole month of December. And remembering it's new moon, new me, new possibility. We're also going to have Mars stationing retrograde at 6 degrees Leo. And though he will retrograde back into Cancer, he's really carrying the torch of the fire sign Leo. And I find it interesting that Mars is the host of the North Node in Aries, and then Venus, the host of the South Node in Libra, is also actually still in a Leo cycle. She's in a Leo/Gemini cycle because we had the superior conjunction of Venus and the Sun in Gemini, and that was most recent, that was this year. But the beginning of her whole overall 19-month-long cycle began in the sign of Leo. And there is this invitation, I think, of Mars and Venus almost as these stewards of the Leo Aquarius axis to help us to look at our creative path and process, and how does that contribute to relationships? How does that contribute to our passions and how we take action? Actually, the last time that Venus and Mars were conjunct was also in Aquarius conjunct Pluto, and it's fascinating that this month we're going to have Venus conjunct Pluto while opposing Mars in Leo. So this Leo Aquarius story is so hot right now. It's so on trend. And it's also just extra important because they are the hosts of the North and South Node, this evolutionary trajectory for all of us this year. And the energetics of Leo and Aquarius will continue to be very important for, the next 2,000 years, being in the age of Aquarius, not debating when that age fully begins or hasn't begun yet, but knowing that we're kind of in that space, that juicy in between space of the Pisces Virgo age to the Aquarius Leo age. So the theme of the individual and the collective group will continue to be important, and they will only become more important as the centuries continue. So we're just at the beginning of all of that. And I think it's so important to really be aware of these bigger happenings, these collective awakening journeys, but then almost like, how do you hold space for that, but then come back to you? It's possible for us to be multidimensionally aware and then take action where it matters most. And the Mars retrograde between Leo and Cancer, I think, is really inviting us to kind of go back and look at our inner teenager. That's very Leo. Same with Aries, very inner teenager. And then into Cancer, inner child. And where did you stop playing? Where did you stop believing that your own personal creative process was the most important thing that there was about life? Like your capacity for play, your capacity for joy and presence and fun, and like having a romance with life. Like, when did that stop? And why did it stop? And where do you get to reclaim that? And that is really the invitation between now through May, with Mars doing what he's doing in Leo and Cancer. So where do you have these fire signs in your chart? They are going to be kind of this, especially with the Mars retrograde, kind of holding down that energy. And then the shift between fire to water is also very important, kind of how they are working together. Because if we're kind of looking at 2025 and beyond, we've got the North Node shifting from Aries to Pisces, but then we have Neptune and Saturn shifting from Pisces to Aries. Even within this Mars retrograde, we're shifting from Leo, fire, to Cancer, water, and then back again to fire. So when I tune into the elemental qualities of fire and water, this is like inspiration, motivation, and then also deep soul level truth and integration and love and a wisdom that it goes so far beyond what the mind can know. Pisces where the North Node is heading and where Neptune and Saturn currently are, is an archetype that is often quite difficult to express with words what's happening. And that's why Pisces is so associated with art and poetry and music and dance and painting and just that kind of self-expression, because those are often the only ways to actually like communicate the wisdom and the beauty and the joy that is coming through. And it almost feels like this Sagittarius season into Capricorn season into next year, January 2025, when we have the nodal axis shift, we're kind of like in this preparation phase where we're closing down certain cycles, certain ways of doing things, doing a lot of the synthesis and integration work and the reflection and refinement so that we can actually start building with this new awareness and hopefully with this new sense of this new self-image, this new self-love, this new permission for your desires to exist, for them to take form, for them to almost lead your life in a new direction. And not from a place of fear, but from this awareness that at the end of this thing, at the end of this life, we die, you know? And that is such a motivating force for me personally, that often when I get kind of stuck in this, like, should I, shouldn't I, should I take this risk? Should I put this creative project first? Or should I just like work more? I don't know. I bet you can see where I'm going here. It's like no one on their deathbed is ever wishing they could have like made more money. You know, they're thinking about their loved ones, thinking about perhaps their legacy and the creative joy that they got to express in their lives. And Sagittarius and the shift into Capricorn, these are both signs that are associated with that type of deep life review, deep life reflection and vision for life and legacy. So it's a great time for vision boarding. It's a great time for tuning into what is it that you want to leave behind? What is it that's worth it for you to put your time and energy into, even if it doesn't materialize in so-called like earthly success? Because ironically, that's actually how we succeed in this life, is by finding that level of fulfillment that transcends the material. So that is a huge invitation this month ahead. Okay, let's look at, well, let's say this about the Venus cycle. So I mentioned Venus as the host of the South Node, really helping us to process any relational projections and falsehoods about our way of being, particularly where we have Libra, and then right now where we have Capricorn and Aquarius very soon. Right before Venus forms a conjunction with Pluto in Aquarius, she's really going through this death and rebirth of her creative expression, and she's forming a conjunction with the moon at the Venus gate associated with the throat chakra. And so this is a reclamation of truth, a reclamation of wisdom, and a reclamation of expression, but right before she enters a death and rebirth. So it does kind of take on that quality of thinking about, well, what are we creating? And what's the worthiness of our creative energy, of what we are trying to magnetize in our life? And it does take on a sense of a tone of seriousness in Capricorn. Like we really are thinking about the longer term implications of what we're creating, and that's a good thing. And then she goes through this rebirth into a new phase relationship with Pluto where she's empowered, and the expression of that is Aquarian. And so it's taking that throat chakra essence and kind of bridging the qualities of both Capricorn and Aquarius, which is, I view it as very, what are the structures that we have worked with for the past little while? How might we actually be dismantling them a little bit, taking them apart to reuse the pieces, to redistribute the resources and reallocate them somewhere else in our lives in a way that they will be more empowered and more fulfilling and more connected to that interwoven, interbraided path of self-actualization and service, which, you know, you put that together and that's purpose, right? So that is a really beautiful thing. And I love that there's so much focus on the throat chakra and communication this month with that Venus gate being in the throat. So we're really reclaiming from this, December 4th through to January 3rd, this power and energy in the throat chakra and our capacity to speak our truth. And really that combined with the Mercury retrograde, helping us to refine and reflect in terms of how we're seeing things, how we're knowing things, how we're choosing. All of that being reflected by the Mercury retrograde. Okay, then we have a full moon, December 15th. That's at 23 degrees Gemini. So by this point, we'll be in this culmination of what is really seeded at the beginning of the month, December 1st, with that new moon in Sagittarius. And the full moon is also conjunct Jupiter. And let me actually just pop the chart up here. So here we go. So the full moon conjunct Jupiter, and then Mercury is also stationing direct that same day in Sagittarius. And this is also a full moon that is square Neptune, whereas the new moon is square Saturn. So that's really, I think, where the Pisces energy wanted to come in. And this full moon is bringing us even closer to that second Jupiter-Saturn square. We already had the first one in the summer. The second one is December 24th, Christmas Eve. And then the third one is actually going to be when both Saturn and Jupiter have entered the cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer. So we'll talk about that one later. But this quality of the expansion, but also the contraction and the worldviews and the beliefs and the ways of knowing and the ways that we're changing and growing, really being illuminated with this full moon. And especially now we added the influence of Neptune, which says a lot about the process of disillusionment. So, I mentioned that earlier, like, how do you hold space for delusion? And what does that mean to you? But this deeper experience of disillusionment that actually brings us from the state of confusion into clarity. And especially by this point, by this full moon, Neptune will be direct. So we often tend to feel a lot more clear, like we can tap into spirit, we can tap into our higher self way of knowing. We can send out a prayer and kind of feel like we're receiving an answer a little bit more. This full moon is really a full moon for answers, a full moon for revelations, a full moon for really seeing who you are, seeing your big, bold vision, and hopefully feeling like you have a more clear path forward around how you'll take action, how you'll actualize that vision. So that's a lovely full moon to really lead us into the next solar season and the winter solstice here in the north. So December 21st, early morning, we have the sun entering Capricorn. And then that's really bringing us to an extreme of light, sun standing still, so that we can really reseed our purpose for the next cycles ahead. And it's the quality of earth, cardinal earth, really helping us to lay a new foundation, planting new seeds. And so the way that the Sagittarius can really inform the Capricorn is this beautiful visioning opportunity that we have to then lay a new foundation, plant a new seed in congruence with the vision, so that there's alignment, so that we're not just doing things just because we've done them before. Sometimes Capricorn can kind of just keep doing what it's always been done, but what's the point of that? What's the benefit of that? The Sagittarius season, I think, will really invite us to review those things, like what is worth continuing the same way that you've been doing and what gets to change. So that, I think, is a good place to close this recording. I just wanted to remind you, so I mentioned at the beginning that I have a sale going on until my birthday, December 12th, for my foundations course, which is mostly beginner, maybe like beginner/intermediate, depending on how you judge things. And I also have a mini reading, single question, quick read on sale until then as well. And that is really great if you have like a burning specific question and not necessarily want to dive super deep into every possible facet of your chart, but you really want to look at something quite specific. Then the single question quick read is really a great one to take advantage of, which will still be available after my birthday, but for a higher price. So if you're looking for the sales, then you can also purchase it right now or anytime up to December 12th, and then you can use it or ask me to not send the recording for like a month. You know, it doesn't have to be like I asked the question right now. And you can just let me know about that in your intake form if you're curious. And I'll have all the links for that below. Something else. So speaking to change and new ways of doing things, I very much like to live in a practice what I preach kind of way, and I try also not to preach. So what do you love about these videos? If you're new, thanks for joining. What would you love to learn about more? What would you love to see more? Please let me know in the comments or send me an email, because I'd love to hear from you. I'm very much in a space where I feel like so much is changing, and I'm in a very interesting creative process, and just being very open to what is next while simultaneously not wanting to burn down everything that I've created before. So I'm very curious to hear what is working for you. What do you love about this time monthly? And would you like to see something different? I'll remind you too that I post more kind of like bite-sized learning things on my Instagram at Nura, and thinking about other ways to show up and serve that might involve more writing. So thinking about Substack, thinking about just other ways of getting information out there. So I'd love to hear from you. What are some of your favorite ways to receive information? What would you love to learn about more? And otherwise, I would just love to hear from you. What would you love to learn about, and what resonated with you most from this video? What's really landing for you? What's this new beautiful vision that's coming through for you? What are you creating? And I'll see you next time. Thanks so much for tuning in.